BPP are huge investors in human capital. We've been training and educating people globally for 30 odd years, and ESG for us has been hugely important. My journey in ESG actually started 30 years ago. My background is I'm an ex-investment manager. I used to work for Barclays and used to build investment portfolios. And I was an equity analyst a long time ago on, we used to call it SRI, socially responsible investing. Ivy alluded to it, had many iterations. We've talked about CSR, sustainability. ESG is a much more all-encompassing term. I'm going to focus a little bit on the S within this, if that's okay, the social aspect of this, because it's incredibly important when we're looking to attract and retain talent. I think that we as human beings often try and simplify, understandably, the world in which we exist. But, you know, these are complex issues. Social justice in particular, you know, one person's interpretation of what is socially just may be very different. And for an organization, when they're looking to attract people to work with them, this is incredibly important, understanding the drivers, because we're in a global war for talent. It's getting incredibly difficult, even more difficult every year to attract talent. And why is that? Well, obviously the pandemic's had an impact now. It's possible to work for a company in a different part of the world with the wonders of modern technology. So when I'm talking about attracting talent, it's really important to think about your people strategy, to think about from the social perspective of ESG, who you're trying to attract and why might they be attracted to work with you. And I say with you specifically, not for you as an organization, because we exist in a very different world, and this world will continue to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, I suspect. That it's an exchange of labor. I don't have to work for BPP. I choose to work for BPP for lots of reasons. They genuinely invest in education and people's careers, and I'm a big fan of that. I grew up in Liverpool in the northwest of England, which in the 1970s and 1980s was quite a troubled place, frankly. And education was transformative to my life. I ended up running a business school. I ended up having a very interesting career in financial services. But I'm very fortunate that now I can exchange my labor for whoever I want to. And I want to with BPP because they represent my values. And this is very much what it's all about, understanding how you as an organization speak to the values of those people that you would want to work with you. And there are many different ways that we can do this. And obviously attracting talent and retaining talent, slightly different focus there, but attracting talent, you know, how are you going about recruiting? Now, you might be lucky enough to work for an organization or work with an organization that has no problem at all attracting top talent. Personally, when I speak to leaders across the globe, they say that, look, our biggest challenge is finding those bright people and attracting them to our organization. So how do you do that? Well, social media is so hugely important now. You know, if you don't have a social media strategy around attracting and retaining talent, and Ivy, a few minutes ago, referred to the fact that, you know, people can go on their social media account and say, I don't want to work for such and such a company anymore. They don't treat me very well, and they don't provide a good working environment. They don't provide the right pay and benefits. They don't provide flexible working, or my manager is somebody I don't want to work for. So you've got to think about your social media profile. And somebody popped in the chat quite rightly that social media can amplify hugely any given issue, can't it? Just as an aside, being the ex-investment manager that I am, there was a company in America that responded with great benefit of hindsight, very poorly to the death of George Floyd in May, or the murder of George Floyd in May 2020 in America. And that company ended up going into administration as a result of their response. And you've got to stop and think, would anybody want to work for a company that was not seen to be doing the right thing and not genuinely and sincerely taking these issues seriously? Things like equality and diversity and inclusion. And I'm a huge fan of all of those, as I'll come to explain why in a moment. So there's the right way and the wrong way. One thing that's really important for me is younger people in particular have a great filter for filtering out insincerity. They can see whether an individual or an organization is not being completely straight with them. So please think deeply about how you communicate your messaging with people, both in terms of attracting talent and, of course, retaining talent, internal communications, and communicating your ESG journey as an organization is vitally important. Because frankly, if I don't think that a company that I work for is taking this seriously and investing in the right areas, then I might choose not to work with them in the future. I'm a great fan of philosophy, reading a lot of philosophy at the moment. Know thyself. Understand both you and your organization in detail. The way that you're going to do that, of course, is you're going to map it or audit. What are we doing at the moment? What is our people strategy? Where do we want to be growing? How do we want to be growing? What business lines do we want to be growing? How do we do that? Have you done an ESG mapping exercise through the lens of the S within ESG? Because inevitably with ESG, all parts of it are incredibly important. The environmental aspect of ESG gets a lot of coverage, of course. Climate change, quite rightly, a key focus of the COP26 conference in Glasgow recently. The impact on our world, on our physical environment, is very, very worrying. The G part, the governance part, well, that's very much how we knit all this together. And I do a lot of training in that space around effective boards. And we're going to come on a little bit later on to talk about the role of the board. But the S column, the social justice aspect, what's fair, what's right, what's equitable, I think that for me is one area that gets a little less focus. So I think, know thyself, know thy strengths and weaknesses as an organization, understand the ESG culture within your organization, understand how that's communicated internally, because that's a key part of retaining talent, of course. And then how does that look externally? When you're looking at external stakeholders, and of course, potential new employees might be part of those stakeholders, how does it look to them? Do you look sincere or not? An area that fascinates me, and I'd really commend you to have a look at, is the fashion industry. And fast fashion has come in for a lot of criticism over the past 10 years, often quite rightly so. The use of sweatshop labor in certain parts of the world. And the fashion industry has had to hugely up its game, because people are not going to buy your clothes if they think that you are damaging the environment and other human beings. And these companies, a lot of these big fashion houses, global fashion houses, realize this, and they've invested heavily into sustainability reporting and ESG reporting. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at that as a microcosm. This is all about direction of travel. I think that this is where compliance and risk was 20 years ago. 20 years from now, this is just going to be embedded into our life in a way that we can't yet possibly imagine. And I think it's really clear that the direction of travel is only going one way. Nobody's going to wake up next Monday morning and say, listen, should we forget all about this? So on to some specifics now. Clearly, workforce sentiment can be a source of competitive advantage. Over the next couple of years, millennials and Generation Z are going to make up most of the workforce, as you can see there on the third bullet point. And this really did catch my eye when I was doing some research, that by the end of this decade, millennials and Gen Z will make up 72% of the workforce. So how we appeal to them is incredibly important. As I say, a lot of people think, younger people don't have the same attention to detail or memory, or they don't have the same attention span that, older people have got. I mean, I'm pushing 50, by the way, for those who are wondering. I disagree with that. I think that they've just got a hyper efficient filter. Because of the use of smartphones and modern technology, younger people often are able to assimilate information very quickly and make judgment calls on them. When you're flicking through Instagram or TikTok at the speed that many of them are, that filter is very highly attuned. So they have an ability to sniff out insincerity. They can really think, hold on, this is not right. Now, at the end of the day, those employers with satisfied employees do well. Of course, the long-term performance and the success of any business, any organization is all down to its people. I always say people are at the heart of everything good and everything bad. And we're very lucky at BPP. We've got a really great bunch of people across the organization. And, it's not like coming to work. It's great. And critically, and the final point there sort of brings it all together. If you've got an attractive image, a genuine image amongst young talent, then you're going to find it easier to recruit, but also to retain that talent. Something that really did jump out at me was just the depth and interest within the younger generation around being actively involved in social justice initiatives, so not only campaigning on the street, but of course using the various social media platforms. There's a very popular trending platform on Twitter, #IWillCampaign. The generation, and I include my age group in this now, I think society realizes that the way to try to influence is not always by taking to the streets. Clearly, there is that as well, but also by actively campaigning online. Now, some companies have come in for huge amounts of criticism online because of the damage that they've caused to the environment. Of course, again, I won't mention any particular companies, that would be inappropriate, but I'm sure you can think of them. What does that do to their image? What does that do to their ability to retain top talent? And would I want to work for a company that was constantly in the firing line, constantly being criticized for being pollutive or perhaps non-inclusive? No, absolutely not. And if I'm like that, well, think about how the rest of the world is like that. So I think the engagement is huge. So coming on to some specifics then, I would really encourage you to think about your own ESG policies, not just through the lens of your ESG reporting requirements, but also through the lens of human capital, talent. So having a recruitment policy which is fair, inclusive, and will ensure that you don't apply discriminatory tactics is incredibly important to your success in your organization. Now, I'm a huge believer, a huge fan of diversity. Okay, I think that as a society, we have wasted huge amounts of talent over the past few thousand years, if not longer. If you think about how women were not included in many workplace scenarios in the past, people of various backgrounds were not included in those organizations. It was a great societal travesty. We're in a much better place, I'm glad to say, than we were maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. But you need to think about your policies and procedures and how you apply those fairly across your organization to make sure that your board, your senior team as well, have a greater ethical awareness, but also critically a willingness to act. Talk is very cheap. And it's all about getting those incentives right. It's all about an alignment of interest. And it's about making sure that I've worked with a number of organizations, for example, where their ESG, what they were saying, their ESG policies, they were not living those experiences. So it's about aligning truly those interests and incentives. And some companies are not going to win here. Okay, so this was just a clip from the FT. The influence from investors to defund those businesses which are, for example, carbon emitters is huge. So this sort of disinvestment, defunding attention that's being focused is massive. Would you want to go and work for a company in the oil and gas industry? It would be a very difficult ask right now, wouldn't it, to do that? And the pressure is going to grow. A lot of these businesses that are recalcitrant, a lot of these businesses that are just not willing to walk the walk with ESG are going to find that it becomes more difficult to fund themselves. It's more difficult to raise money. Their share price will be impacted. Do individuals want to work for companies that are going through those kinds of issues? I suspect not. I'm a great fan of literature. This is one of my favorite slides. How did you go bankrupt? 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly. I think this is quite like ESG for us. And quite like a lot of these companies, how did you fail? How did it not work out for you? Such and such a company. Well, gradually and then suddenly, because we did nothing, we didn't take it seriously, we didn't think about what we needed to do, not just in terms of our impact on the environment, not just in terms of our carbon emissions and climate, not just in terms of our governance structures and anti-bribery and corruption under the G part, but also we didn't take social justice seriously enough. We didn't think about people, and it all ended badly for us. How much is a bottle of water? How much is a bottle of water in Asia Pacific? Well, a bottle of water in the UK, well, it depends where you go, roughly £1. pound sterling. Does that pound represent the true impact of the bottle of water, getting the water out of the ground, the mineral water, transporting it in a diesel vehicle, putting it in a piece of plastic that's going to be around forever, unless it's recycled, which most aren't, by the way. We haven't been accounting well for the impact that we have had on society. We are going to be in a very different world over the next 10, 20 years. That bottle of water is going to go up, and so it should, because actually our impacts have a huge consideration on our environment and our world. Just wrapping up a little bit now, conscious that we're going to have a little bit of a panel discussion. We're going to pick up on a few of these things, but having a really inclusive strategy, looking at things like class, for example. I'm from a working class background in Liverpool. I have an accent which is quite Liverpudlian, some would say. I found that has been a barrier to me in the early part of my career. There were some people, frankly, wouldn't have employed me in the United Kingdom because of my accent. How ridiculous is that? So thinking about how we can break down those barriers is really important. Quick recommendation for you, if you don't mind. An excellent, excellent book by Matthew Syed. Matthew Syed, S-Y-E-D. It's called Rebel Ideas. Matthew Syed, Rebel Ideas. It talks about cognitive diversity. I've got a slide on it there looking at, look, we've all got different journeys, different scripts, different backgrounds, and that's a good thing. We want people of different ages. We want different genders. We want diversity because that gives better outcomes. Now, if you as an organization can harness this, this is where I think you will be successful over the next decade. Final slide from me. My life has changed hugely. In 2090, I did 88 flights. Unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, people look at me like I'm crazy. I didn't enjoy it, and I did not want to do it. But of course, now with the beautiful technology that we've got, the world has moved forward. It has been 10 years, in about 2 years because of COVID. It's been a tough time for us all, I know. But if we can leverage technology and digital, then we are going to be a much fairer, more equitable society. So finally, then, lots of opportunities. We're moving to a more equitable world here. There will be winners and losers. And this, for us, I think, is a great opportunity. And I think the fact that you're attending the event today means that you're very open to it.